When you're prompting the user for something, there's almost always a valid range of values. So we should really error check and make sure that the user is entering something that's correct. So here's an example using a do-while loop. A do-while will force the action to take place at least once. And we're assuming in this code that a number is entered by the user. So we're not checking what is returned by scanf. We're just checking the value of the number to see whether it's a positive number or not. Okay, so we start with the word do, and then in the action, we're prompting the user to enter a positive number. We're reading into a number variable, a float variable, and we're going to do that as long as the number is less than or equal to 0. So as long as the user is typing in negative numbers, we're going to keep repeating the process of prompting the user for a positive number, reading into the variable num, while num is still less than or equal to 0. So when num is greater than 0, when num is in fact a positive number, that will get us out of the loop and we'll print, yay, you entered, and then the value of the number. So we'll just echo print. So again, we're prompting the user or reading until we get a positive number that is entered by the user. So we might want to know how many tries it took before the user entered a positive number. So what we're adding to the code here is a running count. So we start the running count at 0. Same action as before. In a do while, we're going to prompt the user for a positive number, read into the variable number, and keep going while the number is less than or equal to 0. So the only thing we're adding to this is we're incrementing count. So we start count at 0 to begin with. Every time we go through the action loop, we add 1 to count, and then we're saying how many tries it took before the user actually typed in a positive number. Okay, so here's a variation on the error checking in which we're using a while loop, and we're also not assuming that the user is actually entering a number. So we're going to check the value that scanf returns to see whether it's successful or not. We're also going to flush the input buffer by reading one character at a time just to be safe. Okay, so we start by prompting the user to enter a positive number. While scanf, %f, so we're expecting a float, the address of num. So again, scanf is going to attempt to read a number, a float, into the location of num. While that scanf returns a 0, so that means it was not successful in reading a float into the variable num, or if it was successful but the number was less than or equal to 0. So either one of those would be a mistake. If either the user did not enter a float or it was less than or equal to 0, then we didn't get what we want. We didn't get a positive number. So that's going to execute the action and say, sorry, that was invalid, and then prompt the user again to enter a positive number. Now this while loop is going to read one character at a time and check to see whether it's equal to the new line. And the action, again, of this while loop is the empty statement or the null statement. So all we're doing here is just getting rid of all of the characters up through the new line that are in the input buffer. So if the user typed in a bunch of stuff, we're going to get rid of all of that before we go up here and attempt to execute this again. After prompting the user for a positive number, trying to read a float into the variable num. If that was not successful, or if the number that the user entered was less than or equal to 0, then we'll execute this action all over again. So we're going to keep going until the user actually types in a positive number. That will get us out of the loop and down to whatever comes after that in the code. Now in this particular case, we're doing the same thing as before, prompting the user for a positive number, and we keep going as long as the user is not entering a positive number. We keep going through the loop, but we're going to force this to happen 3 times. So 3 times we're going to force the user to enter a positive number, and then presumably in here we'll actually do something with the positive numbers as we get them. So by putting this error checking while loop inside of a for loop, it forces the user to enter 3 positive numbers.